The Oklahoma sun blazed like a forge, beating down on Ada Hart as she strained behind a bulky plow. Her palms were cracked and raw, her back screaming from hours of stubborn labor. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Out here in 1885, the prairie spared no one, least of all a young widow trying to keep 40 acres alive before planting season slipped away. Sweat trickled along her dusty cheek as she swiped her brow with a forearm streaked in grit. 6 weeks had passed since Silas Hart was lowered into the hard, red soil. 6 weeks of sideways looks from neighbors. 6 weeks of proving she could stand alone. The sun-baked ground resisted every push, and the worn wooden plow barely scratched the surface. Her arms quivered with fatigue, while the mule stood frozen, sensing the hopelessness in every tug. "Ma'am, you'll wear yourself clean through if you keep that up." The low voice cut through the glare like a rifle shot. Ada spun Hart jumping and found a tall rider on a chestnut stallion hat brim, shadowing a square jaw roughened by several days of stubble. "My land, my business," she rasped, dry-throated from heat. "And you're trespassing." The stranger swung down in one easy motion, spurs giving a faint jingle as his boots met dust. Up close, his eyes were a clear prairie blue that seemed to read every worry etched on her face. "Gage Hollis," he said, touching his hat. "Headed west to Colorado. Meant no harm, but that field won't turn the way you're fighting it." Ada straightened, conscious of the sweat and dirt on her dress. "I didn't ask for advice, Mr. Hollis." Gage let his gaze drift from her blistered fingers to the meager furrows. Without a word, he stepped to the mule, whispered something soft that flicked the animal's ears, then looked back. "A spread this size needs a steel plow and a full team," he said gently. "You'll break yourself trying to do it alone." "I've got no choice," Ada shot back, color rising in her cheeks. "My husband died before spring planting. If I don't get seed in soon, I lose everything." Something softened in Gage's eyes. He studied the weather-worn farmhouse and sagging barn, then the stubborn strength in her face. "Let me lend a hand," he said, shrugging off his coat. "You've done more than enough for one day." "I don't need charity," she protested, though her arms ached for the rest. "It isn't charity," he replied. "Call it neighborly, even if I'm only a neighbor for tonight. Think of it as payment for water for my horse, and maybe a plate of supper." Before Ada could object again, Gage had taken hold of the plow. With a quiet click of his tongue, he set the mule moving. "Rest a spell," he called over his shoulder, his voice steady in the hot breeze. "I'll finish this stretch before sundown." She watched in disbelief as the mule, so mulish all morning, now obeyed each calm command. Pride battled with common sense. In minutes, he was cutting neat, straight furrows that would have cost her hours. At last she turned toward the house, already thinking of a simple meal she could offer in thanks. From the kitchen window, she caught sight of him again, the late light gilding broad shoulders as he worked with practiced ease. For the first time in weeks, a weight lifted inside her chest. Maybe she could rest just for tonight. The kitchen was stifling despite the open windows. Ada scrubbed her face and sore hands at the pump, wincing as water stung broken skin. The reflection in the cracked mirror showed a young woman whose auburn hair had slipped its braid and whose eyes carried far more than 24 years. Silas had been gone only 6 weeks, yet it felt like half a lifetime. Fever had taken him fast, burying their homestead dreams along with him. She pushed the memory aside and stoked the stove for cornbread and a pot of beans, the best she could offer a passing cowboy. As dusk spread copper and rose across the sky, she watched Gage Hollis finish the field. His shirt clung dark with sweat, but his stride never faltered. That's a fine start, he said, as he reached the porch, removing his hat. Your mule's got grit, but he needs a softer hand. My husband always took the plow. Ada admitted the words tasting of loss. I'm learning as I go. Most things can be learned, he answered with quiet conviction. He nodded toward the pump. Mind if I wash? At her sign, he worked the handle, splashing water over face and neck. The simple, steady motion seemed to pull ordinary life back into the yard. Supper's ready if you've still a mind for it, Ada said, surprised by the calm in her own voice. Much obliged, Mrs. Hart, he replied, with a respectful nod. I'll see to my horse and be right in. Setting 2 plates on the worn wooden table, Ada felt the strangeness of preparing for a man she'd met only hours before. What would Nettie Brooks, the watchful neighbor, say if she knew? Yet, as she glanced once more toward the barn, a quiet gratitude settled in alongside a stirring she hadn't felt in many lonely weeks. Ada pushed the uneasy thought aside. Help was what she needed, and Gage Hollis had stepped in without asking for a thing, nothing more to it. When he came into the kitchen, he'd clearly cleaned up for supper. His dark brown hair, streaked with faint gold, where the sun had kissed it, was damp and slicked neatly back. He had rolled his sleeves past the elbow, revealing lean forearms corded with muscle. Smells mighty good, he said, lingering by the doorway until Ada motioned him to sit. They ate for a time with only the quiet clink of spoons and the far call of a whip poor will. Ada found her eyes drawn to him whenever he glanced down at his plate. His hands were tough, but moved with a craftsman's grace. A thin scar traced his jaw, and the first lines of age fanned out from his eyes, no boy, but still in his prime. How long a ride to Colorado? She asked, at last, breaking the silence. 2 weeks, give or take, Gage answered after a swallow. Depends on the weather and how the rivers run. What waits for you there? Something flickered in his face, a guarded shadow. A fresh start, he said. Ada nodded slowly. That's what Oklahoma was meant to be for Silas and me. Your husband farmed. He wanted to, she said the words, catching. Blacksmith by trade, but his heart was set on the soil. We saved every cent 5 years straight to claim this land. Gage's voice gentled. It's good country. Rich ground under that stubborn crust. You know farming yourself, raised on a Texas ranch, he replied. Been working the rhythm of land and stock since I could walk. Ada hesitated, then asked what had been tugging at her all evening. Why did you stop to help me truly? He set his spoon down and met her eyes. Where I come from, you don't ride past someone in need, especially not a woman wrestling a field alone. He paused. And I've known what it's like when a stranger's kindness is the only thing that keeps you going. The plain honesty in his voice stirred something deep in Ada. She had fought so hard to prove she could stand alone that she'd nearly forgotten the strength in simple human care. Thank you, she said quietly, for the work and the company. Gage's lips curved faintly. Best meal I've had in weeks. That's thanks enough. When supper was done, he insisted on washing the dishes while Ada laid out a pallet in the barn. She offered the spare bedroom, but he shook his head, saying it wouldn't be proper. Later, with moonlight spilling across the kitchen floor, Ada lingered by the window, unwilling to end this rare comfort of shared silence. I can stay a few days, Gage said suddenly, drying his hands. Help you get the ground ready. Ada stared, torn between gratitude and caution. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. No, he agreed, but I know what it feels like to face the impossible alone. He hung the towel back on its peg. Colorado can wait. The mountains aren't going anywhere. Ada wanted to refuse to insist she could manage, but the memory of his strong, steady work in the field silenced her. "I can't pay," she said at last. "Room and board is payment enough, and maybe a slice of that cornbread for the trail when I go." Despite herself, Ada smiled. "I think that can be arranged." She led him to the barn, the cool night brushing her skin. Inviting a stranger to stay felt both reckless and strangely right. "Good night, Mr. Hollis," she said, setting a lantern on its hook. "Gage," he corrected gently. "If I'm staying, let's skip the mister." Ada nodded, suddenly aware how long it had been since she'd spoken a man's first name aloud. "Good night, Gage." As she crossed back to the silent house, she felt his gaze following her. For the first time since Silas Hart had passed, she sensed not just danger in being alone, but the pull of possibilities. Morning came with the sharp crow of her rooster. Ada woke late, surprised by the deep, dreamless sleep that came after so many restless nights. When she stepped outside, Gage was already busy in the barnyard scattering feed for the chickens and filling the water trough. He had traded his trail-worn clothes for one of Silas's work shirts, found hanging in the barn, the fabric stretching over his shoulders, as though made for him. "Hope you don't mind," he said when he noticed her glance. Figured a clean shirt was better for work. Ada swallowed hard. Seeing another man wear Silas's shirt should have pierced her heart, but instead it felt as though the garment had found its purpose again. "It's fine," she managed. "There's coffee on the stove." Over breakfast, they settled into an easy rhythm. Gage asked sharp, practical questions: how many acres she aimed to plant, which crops had thrived before, whether there was a creek for irrigation. "The northeast corner's the best," Ada said, warming as she talked. "Silas always said corn there would grow tall enough to tickle the sky. But I'll need more than corn beans and squash, too, if we're to make it through winter." Gage listened, adding suggestions from his own ranching days. By the time they finished eating, they had mapped out the day's work. "I'll harness both mules," he said. "Double the pull, and we'll cover twice the ground." Ada nodded, grateful for the sure plan. "I'll start clearing stones from the east section while you plow." Gage studied her a moment, those clear blue eyes steady and thoughtful. "Your hands are raw from yesterday. Why not stay inside and tackle some house chores today? I noticed a few weak spots on the barn roof that need patching before another rain rolls in." Ada Hart stiffened at once. "I'm not made of porcelain, Mr. Hollis." "Gage," he corrected patiently. "And I never said you were. But working smart means using the strengths we've got. I've handled a plow since I was 12. You know this place better than anyone. You'll see what else needs mending. Put that way, it was plain sense." Ada finally nodded, and they split up, Gage heading for the field, Ada to check fences and roof seams around the homestead. Throughout the morning, Ada kept finding her gaze drawn to the window that looked over the plowed ground. Gage worked in steady rhythm muscles, bunching and relaxing with each sure pull. By noon, he had turned more soil than she could have in a week, a fact both humbling and strangely freeing. She'd been so determined to prove she could shoulder everything Silas Hart once did that she'd nearly worked herself into ruin. Watching Gage's sure strokes forced her to admit a hard truth. Some jobs truly required a man's strength. Accepting that didn't make her weak. While she patched gaps in the chicken coop and shored up the garden fence, Ada realized her own work was just as vital to the farm's survival. Near midday, she brought a jug of cool water and a bundle of bread and cheese out to the field. "You've carved out a fine stretch," she said, surveying the neat, dark furrows. "Good mules," Gage replied after a long drink. "Once they catch on, they'll pull steady. The soil's loosening now that we've broken that crust." Ada noticed blisters rising beneath the calluses on his palms. "You're tearing up your hands for me." "They'll toughen again," he said with a shrug, tearing off bread. "Got soft doing other kinds of work these past months." What kind of work, she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. A shadow flickered across his face. This and that, mostly cattle drives. He quickly steered the talk elsewhere. How are the repairs coming? Ada let the subject slide and described the chores she'd finished. Somehow his quiet steadiness made her relax in ways she hadn't in months. There was a calm strength in Gage Hollis, a confidence that didn't need boasting. By the third day, their teamwork felt natural. Gage plowed from sunrise to mid-afternoon, then helped mend fences and shingles. Ada tended the garden animals and house preparing meals to keep them both going. Evenings they sat on the porch while fireflies winked in the tall grass, planning tomorrow's work. If the weather holds, we'll have the plowing wrapped by week's end, Gage said, whittling a slim stick with quick, precise strokes. And then planting. Ada murmured, already thinking ahead. I saved seed from last year, but not enough for all these acres. There's a trading post about 10 miles east, Gage suggested. They might have seed to sell. I don't have much left to barter, Ada admitted. What Silas left went to doctoring and the funeral. Gage's knife paused mid-scrape. I spotted some fine leatherwork in the barn bridles and such. Was that your husband's craft? Ada's throat tightened. Yes, folks came from 3 counties for his pieces. Any finished ones left, a few. Silas was working on an order for a ranch near Fort Smith when he took ill. That's worth good money, Gage said, eyes brightening. Quality leather always sells. Hope stirred in Ada's chest. She had avoided that workshop for weeks, the memory too sharp. But Gage was right. Those pieces were more than memories. I'll show you tomorrow, she said at last, surprising herself. That night, lying awake, she listened to the prairie's night music, a coyote calling far off the occasional shift of Gage or his horse in the barn. In 3 short days, he had gone from unexpected intruder to trusted partner. Was it just gratitude she felt? Or the first flicker of something deeper? Silas had been her only love, a boyhood friend turned steadfast husband. His death left a hollow she thought no one could fill. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, it was Gage Hollis's steady blue gaze, not Silas's memory, that followed her into dreams of futures, still unwritten. Morning came with a gentle surprise, a cool, soaking rain that granted the fields a day of rest. Ada found Gage in the barn, bent over a mule's hoof. This one's got a stone bruise, he said, lowering the foot with care. Nothing bad, but he'll thank us for the day off. The rain's a blessing anyway, Ada answered. First time in weeks I'm not fretting over dry soil. Gage straightened and brushed straw from his trousers. Good day to look at that workshop you mentioned. Ada hesitated, then nodded. She hadn't set foot there since Silas died, his tools still hanging just so patterns on their pegs, a bridle left mid-stitch. But today, with Gage beside her, she found the courage to lead him through the drizzle toward the sturdy shed built against the barn, the door creaking open to the familiar scent of leather and oil. Ada's hand trembled as she brushed the supple leather. He had real talent, Gage Hollis said quietly, running his fingers along a finished saddle in the corner. The careful tooling drew a low whistle of appreciation. This is masterwork. For a heartbeat, pride pushed aside Ada's sorrow. He trained with a saddle maker back in St. Louis before we headed west. Claimed he could feel the story of a hide and shape it to what it wanted to be. Gage nodded understanding in his eyes. My pa was a woodworker, could glance at a slab of oak and see the table hidden inside. Ada lifted the lid of a cedar chest revealing neatly wrapped pieces Silas had completed before sickness struck a bridle set, 2 silver-buckled belts, and a pair of handsome saddlebags. Gage examined each one, letting out a soft whistle. Any trader between here and Denver would pay good coin for these enough seed and supplies to set you right. A flutter of hope rose in Ada. You truly think so, I know it, he said carefully, rewrapping each piece. If the weather clears, we could ride to the trading post tomorrow. We, Ada echoed, startled by the assumption. A woman hauling valuables alone is an easy target, he said seriously. I wouldn't be worth my salt if I let you make that trip by yourself. Ada wanted to argue to stand on her own, but she knew he was right. That trail wound through lonely country. All right, she conceded. But I'll handle the trading. These were Silas's. Wouldn't have it any other way, Gage replied. As they stepped from the shop, Ada lingered on the threshold. For months, she'd shut out this room and the memories inside. Now, seeing Silas's craftsmanship through Gage's admiring gaze, she felt a renewed bond with her late husband. Thank you, she said softly, eyes on the ground. For what? For reminding me there's worth in what remains, not just sorrow. Gage met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Sometimes it takes a stranger to help us see what's been here all along. The next morning's ride to the trading post deepened the quiet connection growing between them. Hoofbeats drummed on the rutted trail as they traded stories. Ada of her Kentucky childhood, Gage of the Texas ranch where he'd been raised. What happened to the ranch? She asked while they crossed a shallow creek. His face hardened. War came, then drought, then taxes. My father died defending land that wasn't worth the blood he shed. I'm sorry, Ada said gently. It was years ago, Gage answered, but the hurt lingered in his voice. Taught me not to count on anything lasting. Is that why you're headed for Colorado, to keep from putting down roots? He gave a faint, wry smile. You catch on quick, Ada? Truth is, I've drifted so long I'm not sure I remember how to stay put. Yet you've stayed to help me, she noted. That's different, he said, his blue eyes steady. Helping someone in need isn't the same as belonging. The trading post impressed Ada with its bustle and smell of leather and coffee. Jed Pike, the gruff storekeeper, inspected Silas's work with a critical eye and finally gave a slow nod. Fine pieces, he said, laying out coins enough for seed staples and a small bit left over. Your man does first-rate work. Bring more when he's finished. Ada's throat tightened. My husband passed this winter, Mr. Pike. These are the last pieces he made. Jed's face softened. My condolences. Quality like this is scarce around here. By the time they packed their goods, he called after them with a warning, storms brewing west. Best ride fast, or hole up before nightfall. The warning proved true. Midway home, the sky turned black, and the wind carried the scent of rain. We'd best wait it out, Gage shouted over the rising gusts, pointing toward a stand of cottonwoods by a creek. That trail will be mud in minutes. They reached the trees just as the heavens opened. Sheets of rain slashed the prairie thunder, rolling like cannon fire. Gage quickly rigged a lean-to with his oilskin and a few stout branches, giving them a cramped but dry refuge. Lightning flared, throwing silver light across his face. Ada startled despite herself. Not fond of storms? He asked, his voice close to her ear. She shook her head. Never have been. My mama used to say God was rearranging heaven's furniture, but it never helped. Gage chuckled softly. My grandma claimed thunder was the great spirit arguing with the wind. Didn't make me any braver either. Another flash split the dark, and Ada became acutely aware of how near he sat, the warmth of his shoulder against hers, the steady rise and fall of his breath. For the first time since Silas Hart died, she felt something stir that had nothing to do with fear. Tell me about Colorado, she said quickly, grasping for distraction. What's waiting for you there? Gage was silent long enough that she wondered if he'd answer. When he finally spoke, his words came slow and deliberate. A chance, he said simply. My cousin has land outside Denver, Gage. Hollis said, his voice low as the storm eased. Wrote that he could use a hand with ranching. It's not much, but it's a direction. That sounds like more than a direction, Ada Hart answered softly. It sounds like a future. Gage shifted his arm, brushing hers. Maybe if I can stay in one place long enough to build one. The quiet ache in his words touched Ada deep inside. Here was a man who had given help without question, yet doubted he could ever build a steady life. What makes it so hard? She asked. Thunder rumbled far off as the rain slackened. For a while he was silent, then finally spoke. After the war, after Pa died, I rode with some men who weren't particular about staying on the right side of the law. His tone stayed even, but Ada felt the tension in him. Never killed anyone, but I stood by while others did. Helped rob a stage once. Spent nearly a year running with a cattle rustling crew. Ada drew a sharp breath. 3 years back, I watched an innocent man die because I didn't speak when I should have. He continued, eyes fixed on the gray curtain of rain. Something broke in me that day. I walked away from that life and have worked honest ever since, but... He let out a heavy sigh. Hard to outrun your own shadow, Mrs. Hart. Ida, she corrected gently. Surprise flickered across his face. Most women would be backing off right now, not offering first names. The man who stepped in when I was near despair, who works from dawn to dark, asking nothing back, that's the man I know, she said, steady and sure. Whatever trails behind you doesn't define who you are today. The guarded look in Gage's eyes eased to a glimmer of hope. For a breathless moment, Ada thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he turned back to the soft drizzle. We should ride on soon, he said, his voice rough with things left unsaid. Get home before dark. Home. The word lingered between them, full of meaning neither dared to name. They rode the washed trail in easy silence, the prairie shining under a burnished sunset. Back at the farm, Ada watched him unsaddle his horse, noting the firm set of his jaw and the soft curl of hair at his nape. He had trusted her with his darkest truths. Far from frightening her, the confession made him more real, more human than ever. Thank you, she said, as they carried their supplies inside. For today, for everything. He smiled, eyes creasing. And thank you for listening without running off. That night, Ada lingered at her window. A faint lantern glow flickered in the barn, where Gage was likely reading or jotting in the small leather journal she'd glimpsed. Memories of Silas Hart, stirred of shared dreams and love, unbroken even by death. But for the first time, the remembrance warmed instead of cut. Silas had loved this land. He would have wanted her to fight for it, and to accept help when needed. The next days rushed by in a blur of planting. Side by side, they pressed seed into the rich black earth. My mama always said plant corn when oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear, Ada remarked, swiping sweat from her brow. Seems about right, Gage replied, glancing toward the bordering oaks. Good timing. We'll have it in before the next rain. Under the steady sun, Gage's skin deepened to bronze, his lean frame filling out with regular meals and honest work. The guarded weariness she'd first seen in his face melted. He laughed more freely, especially on quiet porch evenings when Ada mended clothes, and Gage whittled tiny keepsakes, a little horse for the mantel, a bird for the kitchen sill. On the 10th day, as they pressed the last seeds into the final row, Ada spoke the question that had weighed on her heart. Planting's done, she said, brushing dirt from her palms. I suppose you'll head for Colorado now. Gage shaded his eyes against the lowering sun, unreadable. Suppose I should. Ada waited, hoping for more. Silence stretched until she found her courage. Unless... He turned blue eyes sharp. Unless the barn roof still needs patching, she said steadily. And the west fence line has near a dozen posts to reset before cattle drives start, or I'll have strays in my corn. A slow smile spread across Gage's face. Sounds like a heap of work for one woman. It is, Ada admitted, meeting his gaze. Too much, maybe. He stepped closer until she could see the gray flecks in his eyes. Are you asking me to stay a while longer? Ada Hart. I'm suggesting it might suit us both, she said, heart hammering. You need a place to catch your breath before Colorado. I need help with the heavy work. Mutually beneficial, Gage Hollis repeated a trace of amusement in his drawl. That's mighty practical of you. Heat climbed up Ada Hart's neck. I'm a practical woman, Mr. Hollis. Gage, he said quietly, stepping a little closer. If I'm to stay on, it really ought to be Gage. Ada's breath caught. Gage, she said, and the way his name slipped from her lips sent a quick spark through his eyes, a hunger swiftly hidden. He stepped back, breaking the charged moment. I'll stay through the fence mending, he added with studied casualness. After that, we'll see. It was enough for now, a welcome pause to sort the feelings that had begun to stir whenever he was near. That evening they rocked side by side on the porch, letting the cool night breeze wash over them. Hoofbeats thudded on the lane. Ada stiffened. She rarely had callers, least of all after dark. Gage rose smoothly, shifting just ahead of her chair. His hand stayed loose, but his stance spoke readiness. The rider slowed and tipped his hat as the lantern light revealed Marshal Zane Porter from Millbrook. Evening, Mrs. Hart. Hope I'm not disturbing the peace. Not at all, Marshal Ada answered, though her fingers tightened on her skirt. Is something wrong? Porter's eyes slid to Gage, sharp and measuring. Just making rounds checking on widows and homesteads set back from town. His gaze lingered. Don't believe we've met, Gage Hollis, Gage said, offering a steady hand. Passing through, giving Mrs. Hart a hand with her spring work. The marshal shook it, though his other hand hovered near his holster. Passing through from where Texas originally, Gage replied evenly. Been driving cattle the past few years. Any reason you picked this stop? Before Gage could speak, Ada cut in. Mr. Hollis has been a godsend marshal. I was struggling to plow when he happened by. Thanks to him, the planting's done something I couldn't have managed alone. Porter's face softened slightly at her defense. That's so. Well, that's neighborly of you, Hollis. Just doing what anyone ought, Gage said calmly. Not everyone would. Porter grunted. He turned back to Ada. Heard of any trouble out this way? Word is a gang's been prowling, hitting scattered farms. Ada shook her head. Nothing here. It's been quiet. Glad to hear it. Porter swung back into the saddle, then fixed Gage with a level stare. How long you figuring to stay? Long enough to help Mrs. Hart get her fences tight, Gage answered without blinking. Then I'll be on toward Colorado. The marshal gave a slow nod. Good to know who's riding in my jurisdiction. If you need anything, Mrs. Hart, send word to town. With that, he rode off, hoofbeats fading down the road. Ada exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I'm sorry about that. Marshal Porter is thorough. Maybe too thorough. Gage watched the disappearing dust cloud. He's doing his job. A woman alone is an easy mark. He turned to her. Is there real danger close by, Ada? Hesitated. Some? The Brooks place 5 miles east was robbed last month. A stagecoach has been held up twice since winter. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want you thinking I was scared, she admitted, or that I asked you to stay for protection. Gage's voice softened. Ada, there's no weakness in recognizing risk. Taking precautions isn't fear, it's sense. The way he spoke her name with quiet concern sent an unexpected sting of tears to her eyes. She blinked them away. I've managed so far, she said firmly. And admirably, he replied, with a faint, sad smile. But there's no virtue in needless hardship. Accepting help doesn't lessen your strength, it adds to it. His words struck deep. For months, Ada had equated independence with standing apart. Gage offered another way to see it: connection as strength. "I'll remember that," she murmured. Gage nodded and started toward the barn. "I'll check the stock before turning in. Bolt your door tonight, Ada." Left alone, she pondered the marshal's visit. Was it only routine, or did he sense more? The way he'd watched Gage suggested more than simple duty. For the first time, she wondered what else lay in Gage's past. He had confessed to rough company before, but how far had that gone? Was he wanted somewhere? The thought chilled her. Yet when she recalled the man who had worked shoulder to shoulder with her, who treated her with unshakable respect and carved small gifts with patient hands, she couldn't square him with an outlaw's life. Sleep came fitfully. Just before dawn, she stirred at a steady rhythmic sound she couldn't place. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, Ada went to the window. In the gray, pre-dawn light, she saw Gage in the yard, splitting logs with smooth, efficient strokes. The clean thunk of his axe was what had drawn her from restless dreams. For several long minutes, she watched, caught by the quiet strength in every measured swing. Even in the simple rhythm of splitting wood, there was a quiet elegance in Gage Hollis, a man fully at ease in his own skin. As if sensing her eyes, he paused mid-swing and glanced toward Ada Hart's upstairs window. Though he couldn't see past the curtain, Ada instinctively stepped back, pulse quickening like she'd been caught at something private. By the time she dressed and came downstairs, Gage had stacked a month's worth of firewood. He stood at the pump, sluicing water over his bare shoulders, his shirt slung across the fence. Ada froze in the doorway, startled by the sight of his sunlit torso. A pale scar cut across his back with smaller marks scattered over his arms and ribs, proof of a hard-lived life. Yet he moved with an easy strength that left her breathless. She must have made a sound because he turned quickly, tugging on his shirt, in a motion more instinct than modesty. "Morning," he said, voice calm. "Figured I'd get an early start." "I see that," Ada replied, forcing her voice steady. "You've cut enough wood to last half the summer." He offered a faint, apologetic smile. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd put the time to good use." Ada understood that restless need to work a body weary when the mind refused to quiet. "Breakfast will be ready soon," she said, turning toward the kitchen. Ada Gage called softly. She paused. "I'm not planning to ride off just yet. If it suits you, I'll keep on until the big jobs are done." Relief and unease mingled in her chest. Part of her welcomed his protection and skill. Another part feared how much she had begun to depend on his presence. "The fences still need mending," she said at last. "After that, we'll see what makes sense." He nodded, accepting her careful answer. The days that followed blurred with steady work. True to his word, Gage reset fence posts and tightened rails while Ada split her time between the house and the growing crops. Evenings found them on the porch, talking while fireflies winked in the grass. Gage told of endless Texas plains, of riding the wild Arizona trails, of crowded St. Louis streets, alive with noise and promise. Ada listened, drawn not only to the stories, but to the life in his face as he spoke. On the fourth night after Marshal Zane Porter's visit, Gage suddenly asked, "Do you ever think of leaving here, starting over somewhere new?" The question startled her. "Leave this farm." This was Silas's dream, our dream. "Dreams can change," he said quietly. "Sometimes they have to." Ada weighed his words. Where would I go? What would I do? This land is all I have. You've got grit know-how. You could build a life anywhere. His blue eyes held hers. Are you suggesting I walk away from everything Silas and I built? He shook his head. I'm not telling you to leave, just wondering if you've thought about every road open to you. Ada rose, abruptly needing to move. This isn't just soil, Gage. It's Silas's legacy, the future we planned, the children we meant to raise here. Her voice caught on the last word. Gage stood too, his face gentle. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't, she said, though both knew her heart still ached. I made a promise to him and to myself to make this place thrive. He nodded, respect in his eyes. Then we'll give you every chance to keep that promise. The quiet "we" in his reply warmed her more than she expected. As night settled, Ada found herself drawn closer to him than propriety allowed. When their hands brushed, neither pulled away at once, and the brief touch sparked through her like lightning. I should turn in, she whispered. Good night, Ada, he said, eyes lingering. Lying awake, Ada faced what she had tried to deny. She was falling in love with Gage Hollis. Only weeks a widow, she might have expected guilt or shame. Instead, she felt a strange, gentle lifting of grief, a recognition that love could grow again without lessening what had come before. Did Gage feel the same? And if he did, what future could possibly bind them? The answer came sooner than she imagined. The next afternoon, as Ada hung fresh laundry while Gage worked the west fence, 3 riders approached from the north, their formation too tight, their pace too purposeful for casual travelers. Alarm prickled her skin. These were no neighbors. She dropped the damp sheet and hurried to the barn for Silas Hart's old rifle. By the time she stepped onto the porch, the men were close enough for their hard, weathered faces to show faces carrying no trace of goodwill. Keeping her hands steady, Ada set the rifle where they could see it without raising it. Afternoon, gentlemen, she called evenly. Something I can help you with? The lead rider, a tall man with a jagged scar slicing through his left eyebrow, offered a thin, cold smile. Maybe so, ma'am. We're looking for a friend of ours. Heard he might be around here. I don't see many visitors, Ada said, voice calm. Who are you after? The scarred man swung down from the saddle, every move easy, but his eyes sharp as broken glass. Goes by Gage Hollis these days. Tall fella, dark hair, blue eyes, a bit of a drifter. Ada's heart thudded hard, but her face betrayed nothing. And if I have seen such a man, then we'd be obliged, he said with a wolfish grin, if you'd kindly point us his way. The scarred man let his hand rest easy near his holstered revolver. Family matter, you understand. You don't look like kin to me, Ada Hart said evenly, her grip tightening on Silas Hart's old rifle. The man's false smile dropped. Listen, lady, we know Hollis has been bunking here. Marshall and Millbrook mentioned a stranger helping the widow Hart get her fields planted. Fits Gage to a T. Ada's mind raced. Gage was still out near the far fence, too far to hear. If she could buy him time, maybe she could send these men off on a false trail. Mr. Hollis was here, she admitted calmly. Left yesterday for Colorado, said he's got kin waiting. The scarred man studied her face, weighing every blink. Behind him, his 2 companions swung down from their saddles, spreading out in a way that made Ada's skin prickle. That, so he said, at last, suspicion sharpening his tone. Mind if we look around, see if our friend left anything behind? Before Ada could answer, a firm voice cut through from behind the barn. She's not lying about Colorado. That's where I'm headed. Gage Hollis stepped into view, rifle balanced easy but ready. Just not quite yet. The scarred man, Cyrus Flint, grinned without warmth. Well, well. Gage Hollis, big as life. Been a while. Not long enough, Gage said, steadily moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ada. What do you want, Cyrus? You know damn well, Cyrus snapped. 5,000 in gold vanished the same night you did, along with 2 of my men. I didn't take your gold, Gage replied, face like stone. And those men, last I saw, they were scheming to double-cross you. If they pulled it off, that's on you. Cyrus's hand slid closer to his gun. You're lying, Hollis. Always were slick with words. Believe what you want, Gage said evenly. Then ride on. This lady has nothing to do with old business. Cyrus's gaze drifted to Ada, a slow, mean smile curling. Found yourself a widow to keep you company, eh, Gage? Always did like rescuing damsels. He stepped forward, eyes glinting. Does she know the sort of man she's taken in, the tricks you've run? Back off, Cyrus, Gage warned, his voice gone low and dangerous. Whatever's between us stays between us. Cyrus gave a harsh laugh. Oh, I think the lady ought to hear. Your friend here was the sharpest confidence man in 3 territories, could charm a rattler out of its fangs, used those pretty blue eyes to swindle lonely women out of heirlooms and hard-earned savings. Ada's heart thumped, but she kept her rifle steady. She shot a quick glance at Gage. His face was set like iron. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. People can change, or they just find new marks, Cyrus sneered. What's he after, ma'am, your farm or whatever valuables your late husband left? That's enough, Gage said, lifting his rifle a fraction. You've spoken your piece, now leave. Cyrus's fingers hovered near his revolver, but before he could draw, Ada stepped forward, rifle firm in her grasp. Mr. Hollis asked you to ride on, she said crisply. I'm asking too. This is my land and you're trespassing. A taut silence hung, broken only by the horse's restless snorts. Then Cyrus let out a grudging chuckle. Got yourself a spirited one, Gage. He backed toward his horse. We'll go for now, but this isn't finished. Swinging into the saddle, he called over his shoulder. I'll be watching Hollis. Try leaving this territory without settling up and you won't make 10 miles. Ada and Gage stood side by side until the 3 riders disappeared over the ridge. Only then did she lower her rifle, realizing her hands were shaking from the delayed rush of fear. You all right, Gage asked, concern sharpening his voice. Ada nodded, swallowing hard. When she finally spoke, her tone was steadier than she felt. Who were they, Gage, truly? He exhaled, jaw tight. Men I rode with years ago before I walked away from that life. He hesitated, then met her eyes. Cyrus wasn't lying about everything. I did things I regret. But you didn't steal his gold number. Gage's reply was firm. That was his second Finn Doyle. I uncovered their scheme and refused to play along. Left the same night, but in another direction. Ada searched his face for any hint of falsehood and found only hard-won honesty. I believe you, she said simply. Relief softened his features. Thank you. He looked toward the trail the men had taken. But they'll be back. Cyrus won't drop a grudge, especially when he thinks there's money on the line. What will you do? She asked, heart tightening. First make sure you're safe, he said grimly. Then I have to clear my name, find Finn, or proof of what really happened. He drew a long breath. But now that they know where I am, you think you should leave Ada finished? He nodded. My being here puts you in danger. No. The word escaped before she could stop it. If you run, he'll believe every lie he told. He might come after me instead. A shadow crossed Gage's eyes. I won't let that happen. Then stay, Ada said, reaching out without thinking and clasping his hand. We'll face this together. Something shifted in his gaze, a choice made. Together he echoed softly, fingers tightening around hers. That evening, As dusk settled over the prairie, Ada and Gage sat at the kitchen table, the rifle propped close by. "Marshal Zane Porter needs to know about Cyrus and his crew," Ada said, refilling Gage's coffee. "They're outlaws, plain and simple." Gage Hollis nodded, though a troubled look stayed in his eyes. "Marshal Porter already figures I'm more than a drifting cowhand. If I tell him how I once rode with Cyrus Flint, he might clap me in irons before he ever offers help." "Then I'll speak to him," Ada Hart said firmly. "I'll tell him only that those men threatened us, nothing about your past." Gage studied her for a long beat, then slowly inclined his head. "It might work." "But Ada," he reached across the table, his warm hand closing over hers, "you need to know what you're stepping into. Those men don't make idle threats." "I'm already in it," Ada answered, her gaze unwavering. "The moment they rode onto my land." Something in her quiet resolve eased the tension in his jaw. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze before letting go. "Then we'll ride to town together tomorrow and lay this out for the marshal." That night a new tension hummed through the house. Gage insisted on sleeping inside, stretched on a blanket near the door instead of the barn. The thought of him so close set Ada's heart beating faster, for reasons that had nothing to do with danger. Morning brought a crisp sense of purpose. After a quick meal, they saddled their horses and set out for Millbrook. The town sat an hour's ride away, close enough for supplies, yet far enough that Ada seldom traveled there without real need. Marshal Zane Porter's office anchored the main street, a stout brick building with a small jail out back. As they tied off their horses, Porter stepped into the sunlight, his brow lifting at the sight of them. "Mrs. Hart, Hollis." He tipped his hat. "What brings you to town? We need a word in private," Ada said. His sharp eyes flicked between them, but he opened the door and ushered them inside. When the door closed, Ada recounted the confrontation with Cyrus and his men. Their threats, their claim that Gage had stolen gold. "They called their leader Cyrus Flint," she finished, said Mr. Hollis took their gold. "He denies it." Porter leaned back, gaze narrowing on Gage. "Why would they figure you for their missing gold?" Gage met the marshal's eyes squarely. "Because I once rode with them, years back before I turned my life around." To his credit, Porter didn't reach for his cuffs. "Go on." Gage told the whole story, the gang, his decision to quit, and how Finn Doyle had likely taken the gold while framing him. He spoke plainly about his own wrong turns, but was just as clear that he'd kept a clean trail since. When he finished, the office fell silent, except for Porter's fingers drumming the desk. "You realize I could arrest you right now for what you just admitted, yes?" Gage said evenly. "But that wouldn't protect Mrs. Hart. She's in danger because of me." Porter's eyes slid to Ada. "That how you see it, ma'am? That Hollis brought this danger to your door?" Ada lifted her chin. "No, Marshal. Those men are the danger. Mr. Hollis has done nothing but help me." Porter exhaled hard. "Cyrus Flint's a mean piece of work. I've had warnings on him from 3 counties, robbery, extortion, even killing when it suits him." He turned back to Gage. "You're sure Doyle took the gold? As sure as a man can be without watching it happen?" Gage said. Finn griped for weeks that Cyrus was shorting his cut. He had motive and the chance. Porter thought it over, then nodded. "I'll telegraph neighboring sheriffs. If Flint shows his face, we'll bring him in." His eyes hardened. "But hear me, Hollis, if I find out you're playing me or Mrs. Hart, you'll wish Flint got to you first." "Understood," Gage replied. When they stepped back into the sunlight, Ada felt a measure of relief. At least the law now knew who threatened them. Yet she doubted even Marshal Porter could fully shield them from men like Cyrus. Gage seemed to share the thought. "Let's stop by Jed Pike's store for ammunition before heading home," he said quietly. They rode back with extra cartridges and a lingering unease. Twilight found Gage double-checking every door and window. Ada came from her room to find him still seated by the front window rifle across his lap, watching the moonlit yard. "You should try to sleep," she said softly. I will, he answered, eyes on the night. Just want to be sure the place is quiet first. She stepped closer, drawn by the heaviness in his tone. You blame yourself for this. It wasn't a question. Yes, he admitted. I should have kept riding, kept my troubles to myself. If you'd done that, I might have lost the farm or worked myself into an early grave, Ada replied, her voice gentle but sure. Gage finally looked at her moonlight, catching the conflict in his eyes. And now you could lose everything because of me. That's not going to happen. Without thinking, she brushed her fingers against his cheek. We'll get through this, Gage. Together. He caught her hand, holding it to his face for a long breath before lowering it carefully. Ada, he said, his voice rough with things long buried, you should know the part Cyrus told about me swindling women. That was true. Ada stayed silent, sensing he needed to finish. I was good at gaining trust, he said hoarsely. Especially with women left alone, widows, spinsters with inheritance. I'd make them believe I cared, then disappear with what I could carry. He swallowed hard, shame. Stark in his eyes. The confession hung heavy between them. Gage seemed to brace for disgust, but Ada simply asked, And now are you conning me, Gage Hollis? The question caught him off guard, his breath hitching as though she had pulled the floor from under him. No, Gage Hollis said with sudden force. God, no, Ada. That's not who I am anymore. That's why I had to tell you so you'd know I've changed. Ada Hart searched his face and found only raw remorse and a deep need for her trust. I know who you are, she answered softly. You're the man who stopped to help a stranger when there was nothing in it for you. The man who worked beside me without complaint. The man who carves beauty out of scraps of wood with the same hands that once took what wasn't his. Gage's breath caught disbelief and fragile hope flickering in his eyes. How can you trust me after what I've told you? Because people can change, Ada said simply. You proved it the day you took hold of the plow and told me to rest. Something in him gave way. He rose, closed the space between them in 2 strides, and cupped her face with a tenderness that undid her. Ada. He whispered her name a prayer. His kiss began gentle questioning, giving her every chance to turn away. Instead, she leaned into him, her fingers sliding up his shoulders as the kiss deepened, stealing her breath and awakening a warmth she thought forever gone. When they finally drew apart, Gage rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough. I never meant for this to happen, never believed I deserved someone like you. Ada's smile trembled with joy. Maybe that's exactly why you do, because you don't think you deserve it. A faint laugh, almost a sigh, escaped him. He might have kissed her again, but a sound outside snapped him back to caution. He crossed to the window and peered out. Just the wind, he said, though his shoulders stayed taut. But Ada, this doesn't change the fact that you're in danger because of me. I have to settle things with Cyrus Flint once and for all. We will, Ada said, putting quiet strength on the we. But not tonight. Tonight we both need rest. Reluctantly, he nodded. Go on to bed. I'll keep watch a while. Before she left, Ada pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. Her mind and heart were too full for sleep, but eventually the house settled into a deep prairie quiet. 3 tense days passed with no sign of Cyrus. Gage split his hours between mending the fence line and keeping vigilant watch. Ada carried on with chores, refusing to let fear dictate her life. Evenings brought small oases of peace. Gage taught her poker with dried beans for chips. She shared stories of Kentucky childhood and the sister she'd lost to scarlet fever. They laughed over Mark Twain and agreed overly sweet pies were a sin. Sometimes they simply sat, hand in hand, his thumb tracing circles in her palm, sending warm shivers through her. On the fourth morning, while Ada gathered eggs, she heard approaching hoofbeats. Her pulse quickened, but she steadied her movements and headed for the house where Gage was crouched over a loose porch board. He heard it too. She saw it in the way he smoothly lifted his rifle as he stood. Relief followed when the riders came into view. Marshal Zane Porter and a deputy Ada didn't know. Morning Porter called, reining in. "All quiet so far," Gage replied, lowering the rifle, but keeping it close. "Any news?" Porter dismounted, signaling his deputy to keep watch some. "That's why we rode out." He tipped his hat to Ada. "Marshal," she greeted. "Would you care for coffee? It's fresh." "I surely would," he said. Soon they were at the kitchen table, while the deputy stayed outside. "We picked up one of Flint's men in town last night," Porter said, warming his hands on the cup. "Got himself drunk and started boasting about teaching Hollis a lesson." Gage tensed. "Blackie. Missing 2 fingers on his left hand." Porter nodded. "That's him. Said Flint plans to hit this place tonight, figures you'll expect trouble by daylight, so he aims for midnight or later." Ada's stomach tightened, though she kept her voice even. "How many?" 5, Porter answered. "Flint, the 2 you've seen already, and 2 more he's picked up in Millbrook." He looked from Ada to Gage. "I've deputized 4 men. We'll be back before sundown and set a proper welcome." Gage's brows rose. "You're helping us." "I'm upholding the law," Porter said with a snort. "Cyrus Flint is wanted in 2 states. The fact that catching him helps you is just a side effect." Yet a faint gleam in his eyes hinted he didn't mind the overlap. After laying out a plan, the marshal and his deputy headed back to town for reinforcements. When the yard fell silent again, Ada turned to Gage. "Can we trust his plan?" Gage thought a moment. "Porter's a solid lawman, but Flint's sly. If he suspects a trap..." He shook his head. "We'd better be ready for anything." All afternoon, they prepared. Gage showed Ada how to load and fire his pistol in case the rifle proved awkward indoors. Together they moved valuables and key supplies to the root cellar, which could double as a final refuge. He braced the downstairs windows with spare lumber and heavy furniture. Each thud of hammer and nail a promise that they would meet the night side by side, ready for whatever came. Ready for... As the sun slid low and the sky burned orange, Marshal Zane Porter returned with 4 armed deputies, just as promised. 2 slipped into the barn, another hid in the corn crib, while Porter and the last man joined Ada Hart and Gage Hollis inside the farmhouse. "Now we wait," Porter said, checking his pocket watch. "Could be a long night." Time crept like cold molasses. Every creak of timber or whisper of wind made Ada's heart jump. Gage stayed outwardly calm, but she caught the tight set of his shoulders and the sharp, steady sweep of his eyes as he checked each window. Close to midnight, a soft whistle floated in from outside a deputy's signal. Riders coming the man at the back window murmured. Porter snuffed the lamp, plunging the room into moonlit shadow. East side, the lookout whispered. "6 of 'em moving slow." 6 Gage frowned. Buck Crow swore it'd be 5. Either he lied, or Flint found another gun, Porter said. Through a narrow crack in the curtains, Ada glimpsed Cyrus Flint dismounting and signaling his men to fan out. "Hold fire till they cross the line," Porter ordered softly. "I want it clear who shoots first." Minutes stretched like hours, until the night split with the crash of breaking glass. One of Flint's men smashed a side window. Morgan Cyrus's harsh voice rang out. "Come face me like a man. Bring the gold and maybe we'll let your widow live." Porter gestured to his deputy, who slipped out back to alert the barn team. Then the marshal stepped forward, voice iron strong. "This is Marshal Porter. You're trespassing and threatening lives. Drop your guns and surrender." A beat of silence, then a burst of gunfire answered. Ada ducked as bullets chewed into wood. "So much for surrender," Porter muttered, firing back through the window. The yard erupted in gunfire. Deputies hidden in barn and corn crib returned fire, trapping the outlaws in a deadly crossfire. "Stay low," Gage urged, shielding Ada with his body, but she refused to be a bystander. Sliding to a rear window, she steadied Silas's old rifle. When a shadow darted toward the back door, she fired. A cry of pain and a heavy fall followed. "Fine shot," Gage said, with genuine admiration. The fight raged on, loud, brutal, yet only minutes long. Gradually the shooting thinned, then ceased. Porter moved to the front window. "Flint," he called. "It's over. Toss down your guns and come out." Moans of the wounded drifted in the quiet. Then suddenly gunfire roared again right at the front door. Bullets splintered the wood. Back, Gage shouted, yanking Ada clear, just as the door crashed inward. Cyrus Flint stood there, wild-eyed, blood streaking his forehead, a pistol in each hand. "You ruined everything, Hollis," he snarled, raising both guns. Time slowed. Gage sprang forward, tackling him as the outlaw fired. They hit the floor hard, wrestling for the weapons. A shot thundered in the confined space. For a terrible instant, both men lay still. Then Gage rolled clear. Cyrus lay unmoving, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Ada dropped to Gage's side, frantic. "Are you hurt? I'm all right," he said, breath ragged. "Bullet caught him, not me." Porter knelt by the fallen outlaw, checked for a pulse, then looked up grimly. "He's gone. Clean shoot Hollis self-defense, and half a dozen witnesses to prove it." Outside, deputies secured the rest of the gang. 2 dead, 3 wounded, 1 surrendering without a fight. By first light, Porter and his men were ready to haul the prisoners to town. "Come in tomorrow to give statements," he told Ada and Gage. "After that, this case is closed." He paused, studying Gage with a new respect. "You handled yourself well. Ever think of wearing a badge? Deputy pays modest, but it's honest work." Gage looked a little taken aback. "I'll give it thought, Marshal. Thank you." When the posse finally rode off with their captives, silence settled over the homestead. Ada and Gage stood on the porch, surveying bullet holes, pocking the walls, a shattered window, a door hanging crooked. Yet the crops were untouched, the animals safe, and they were alive. "We'll have to start repairs right away," Ada said, already tallying tasks. "Before the next rain." Gage turned toward her, an unreadable depth in his blue eyes. "Ada," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes, with Flint dead, and his men jailed, the dangers past." Gage drew a slow breath. "I could ride on to Colorado as I planned, or she prompted, breath-catching. "Or I could stay," he said, taking her hands, his gaze steady and full of meaning. "Stay here with you, if that's what you want." Tears stung Ada's eyes, not of sorrow, but of something far richer, as dawn washed the battered homestead in soft gold. "Are you proposing a business deal, Gage Hollis? A farming partnership?" Ada Hart asked, a teasing lilt in her voice that echoed their very first conversation. A slow smile tugged at Gage's lips. Not exactly Mrs. Hart. His tone turned steady, serious. "I'm asking for something permanent, something built on more than practical needs." Ada's heart beat faster. "Such as—" Her words were scarcely above a whisper. "Such as this." Gage's blue eyes held hers. "I've fallen in love with you. I want to build a life here with you, if you'll have me to see your dreams for this farm take root, and to grow new ones together. Joy welled up so strongly Ada almost couldn't breathe. Even though I'm stubborn enough to try plowing 40 acres alone, Gage chuckled softly. Especially because of that. His fingers closed around hers with quiet strength. You're the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known. I'd be honored to stand beside you for whatever's ahead. Ada looked up at the man who had walked into her life like an answered prayer, a man who had faced his past and chosen a better road, who had guarded her home and her heart with equal devotion. Yes, she said, her voice sure and full. I want you to stay Gage Hollis, not as a hired hand or a passing traveler, but as my partner, my husband, when the time is right to honor Silas Hart's memory. Gage's face lit with unrestrained happiness, years of roaming and regret giving way to belonging. He drew Ada into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that promised a shared future. The morning sun crowned the battered porch and the fields beyond, where young green shoots reached for the light, a perfect emblem of the life beginning for them both. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning with harvest stored, safe Ada Hart became Ada Hollis in a simple wedding led by Pastor Clyde Boone. Marshal Zane Porter stood as Gage's best man, and Nettie Brooks, once merely a watchful neighbor, now a trusted friend, attended Ada. Together, they made the farm flourish. Gage's skill with livestock matched Ada's gift for crops. They added a small cattle herd and planted an apple orchard. Though Marshal Porter often urged him to take a deputy's badge, Gage found a deeper calling at home, turning Silas's old leather tools into a thriving trade. Before long, Morgan Leatherwork earned a name for quality clear across the territory. 2 years after Cyrus Flint's raid, Ada gave birth to a daughter with auburn hair like her mother's and eyes as blue as her father's. They named her Lila Hart, a living sign of the hope that had drawn them together. Many an evening when chores were done and the prairie turned to gold, Gage and Ada rocked on the porch swing he'd built for her birthday, watching Lila tumble and play where her parents' paths had first crossed. Sometimes Gage would recall that spring afternoon. I still remember the sight of you, Ada, battling that plow all alone, too proud to quit. Ada would lean her head on his shoulder and smile. And I'm still glad you stopped even knowing all that came after. So am I, he'd answer, holding her close. Every single day I thank the Lord I took that plow from your hands and told you to rest. And as dusk settled over the thriving homestead they had built together, Ada would smile at the memory of a dusty cowboy whose simple act of kindness had forever changed the course of her life. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.